listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are still live from America and just outside the Matrix. It is time once again for the show that brings you the truth way behind the headlines. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan, and this is The Backstory. Now, I want to start by saying we had very bad news yesterday. Management over at RT America decided to shut down operations and production, and everybody over there, including a number of people who are on the show all the time. We had Manila Chan on earlier in the week, but Scotty Nell Hughes, Caleb Maupin, we've had Jesse Ventura, Rick Sanchez on. Everyone's laid off over there. And I'll tell you, as badly as I feel for all of those people, I feel really badly for the RT audience who's going to be missing out on things. But I will say, we welcome you here at Sputnik. This is somewhat macabre, but RT's loss is Sputnik's gain in a sense. The audience who's thirsty for truth is still out there. And we invite the RT audience to come join us. We're not as attractive, look at me for God's sakes. And they had a very nice set over at RT. Very well produced TV, very professional, top-notch production. But there were a lot of great hosts over there. And we hope you'll still hear some of them as guests, maybe more here on Sputnik. So I want to get that out of the way and say we wish everybody over there the best in whatever they do in the future. And it's one of the bad byproducts of this war, which I think was, and by the way, now, is there an update? I've been out running errands. Our triple producer, Rod, let me ask you, where in the world is Zelensky? Have they found him yet?
There's still no concrete update on where he's actually at.
Okay, but I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I said this on Twitter and made the point by putting my dorky-looking face up there. If I was Zelensky and there was a report that I had left, that I had split, I'd flown the coop, right? If that was out there, the reports are that Zelensky's flown the coop and gone to Poland. Now, if it were me, I would grab my cell phone, get a picture of Kiev in the background, get up there online and say, hey, look, no, I'm right here. Right, Rod? He has the equipment to disprove this story in about a minute and a half. Am I right or wrong?
Maybe even less than that. He can just put a street sign, here I am, or a building. But he looks like he's captured. He's wearing casual clothes and military people around him. He looks like he's captured.
Yes. So this guy who's been the hero, and he was out there, the selfie hero, for hours now. And that's why I asked for the update, because there could be something new. There could be, no. He posted a picture of him eating strudel in Kiev or whatever. I don't know if they eat strudel there. That's more Vienna. But I don't really know what chicken Kiev is all I can think of. And even then, you'd have to call it chicken Kiev, which doesn't sound as yummy to me. But Zelensky apparently has flown the coop. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think he has, because there's no proof to the contrary. Does that make sense, Rod? Or am I jumping the gun? I'm just trying to apply some logic here.
No, I think you're right. And, he's doing these impromptu little press conferences, but he just doesn't look right. He doesn't look right.
Yeah, there's something weird going on. And I think that'll be an interesting blow to the narrative if that happens. And we'll talk about this Lindsey Graham craziness in just 1 second. And I'll let people in on, I want them to remember who Lindsey Graham is and why him calling for the assassination of Vladimir Putin. First off, I don't think he should be calling for Zelensky, I'm not a fan. I'm not calling for his assassination, Rod. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I've never heard you call for anybody's assassination.
Right. I'm opposed to it. but especially Vladimir Putin, who I consider one of the best leaders in the world. And I've said that before this war, and nothing's happened to change my mind. Although we had Mark Slobodin on yesterday, I will say this. Russia's shut down some media outlets, Radio Echo, also BBC Russia. No one consulted me from Russia. I'm a free speech person. I think that's a mistake on the part of Russia. I understand the mistake. I see why after RT and Sputnik is shut down in Europe, they're closing down DW and these other outlets in retaliation. I will say, I don't think it's the best move. I understand it, but I don't think Russia should have done that personally. To me, it's not the hugest deal in the world. I sometimes kind of wish, Rod, if I said that I sometimes wish they would ban MSNBC and Fox and everybody, I don't mean that, but you know where the place it's coming from, right?
No, I agree with you. Oliver Darcy of CNN, he's been going hard the past week on RT, but he's kind of led up to this.
And hey, Oliver, call me. Oliver's talked to me. He's got my number. Oliver, get in touch. You want a quote from someone connected to Sputnik? Because here I am. I'm connected to it. But like I'm on it right now. Although people have been saying they've been having trouble hearing it. We have heard that consistently from people, Rod. And I don't know what's up with that. If it's tomfoolery or some sort of plan that's going on. But we got a great show today. Let me tell you about it. First off, joining us as our guest co-host today, it's a Frosty Friday. I believe, Mark, are you there? Mark Frost, are you there?
I am here.
Hey, Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing quite well. I just bought some rubles.
Did you?
Yes.
Now, I want your explanation on that. By the way, I don't have any to sell you. Otherwise, I might. But because you know what one of the things that trolls like to come at me is, are you paid in rubles? I've literally heard that line a dozen times over the years. And it's a stupid line. Because why would I be? I'm an American who lives in America. But they like to pretend like that's a good line. But we'll talk about why you're buying rubles. Welcome to the show, Mark. I wasn't trying to ignore you there. I kind of get caught up in my own rap sometimes. So welcome, Mark. Happy Frosty Friday. How are you doing?
Doing very, very well. Bought some rubles. Drinking a cup of coffee. Just finished up my invasion of Europe on my war game. Life is good. Bought a new motorcycle.
Oh, let me ask you this. Do you speak much Russian?
I don't speak hardly any Russian.
Okay, do you know the Russian word for tea?
I don't.
Okay, I'm going to tell it to you, and you'll remember it, and everyone else will, because it's a well-known word at this point. The Russian word for tea is chai.
Ah.
And of course,
as in a chi-squared distribution. I get it.
Well, as in like chai tea latte that you can order.
Oh, I see. Okay.
You see what I'm saying? So chai just means tea. And so it's an easy word to remember. It's almost like if the Russian word for large was venti, I'd remember it. But venti is a made-up word Starbucks came up with.
That's a dumb word.
Mark, this is the second week in a row when you get to talk to, and normally this would be something that would suck for you. But on this show, it's a bonus. This is the second week in a row you get to talk to a candidate, someone running, who you're not going to hate.
I like that. I like it when you book people that I don't hate.
Right, and you know what I'm saying? What I'm getting at is that normally when you hear a candidate, that's not, oh, good, can't wait to talk to them. Normally, that's a problem, right? But what I'm saying is the candidate we have today, Allison Hayden, she's a constitutional conservative, already off to a decent start as far as I'm concerned. But I found her because she's actively out there questioning this Russian narrative. And what I'll call the Russian narrative is the idea that you reflexively knee-jerk have to put a Ukrainian flag up in your avatar.
Well, my confusion on all of this has long been, and especially been lately, is just, I mean, I've always kind of expected the anti-Russian sort of knee-jerk reaction towards Russia from conservatives. That's culture. That's almost culture now in America. What I didn't expect it from was the progressives and the liberals. And I didn't expect that from the left. And they've been more militant than the conservatives.
I'm going to give you a phrase. Are you familiar with the term tanky?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so explain your definition, what you believe a tanky is.
Tanky is a nasty person.
Yeah, it has to do with people who supported, back in the Soviet days, when the Soviet Union brought tanks in. And it's a derisive term that progressives are using. It means basically like a fake progressive. And they're saying anybody who's supporting Russia is a fake progressive. I got to say this. Let's take one issue alone. Julian Assange. Russia and Russian-funded media like this show have been Julian Assange's biggest advocates. Okay? Edward Snowden is in Russia, not because he wanted to be, but because Russia was the only country that would protect him. So I would say on issues that I agree with you, that I think people who are progressive or whatever would be, but you know what else they love is, I'll tell you when I knew things were in trouble, is when they were praising the FBI and the CIA on SNL. Remember that?
Yeah, it's insane.
It is insane. But I realized. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I just Googled "kanky" in the Urban Dictionary, and the Urban Dictionary says "kanky" is not hardcore enough to be kinky, but now low class enough to be skanky. The happy, naughty symbiosis of the both. Tanked up, horny in a naughty way that takes over and makes you suggest fantasies in public. Example: that outfit is particularly kanky. So we just learned something, man.
Yeah, but I don't think that's what progressives mean by it. Because I would actually, I'd be in favor of those progressives.
Well, yes. Well, see, I like progressive music.
Right. That's what I was saying. If you like your rock progressive but not your politics, then we'll probably get along. But
I even like my income taxes progressive. See what a radical capitalist I am?
In the second hour, we got the great Ted Rall, commie. But Ted is like my favorite commie. He's one of my other favorite commies, no longer working at RT. That's Caleb Malpin. These are both guys who are very smart. Have you noticed this? Do you know many commies, Mark?
I know a lot of them, and the ones that are real commies are usually delightful to know, interesting to hang out with, fun to drink with, etc.
And they're also, if I say this, you'll know what I mean, I think. And I don't know the commies you know necessarily.
And we argue incessantly, but always respectfully.
Right. But they also know the history of communism. They understand what Matewan was, let's say.
Well,
you know what I'm talking
agree
about.
On things. I mean, that's the
Mark,
beautiful thing about thinking, is we can agree on things.
Yes, and that's why Ted Rall is joining us in the second hour. Candidate for the 14th District in California, Alison Hayden is our guest in the first segment, in the first hour, not first segment. This is the first segment, technically. That's all. I'll let you say the name of the show, Mark. Go ahead.
The Backstory.
So let me ask you, Mark, just a general, and you know what? I've said this is where free speech lives, and I mean it. People, we're not screening calls. We only take calls that are pro-Russian. There's nothing like that. And you know, Mark, again, I feel, I'll put it like this. If you go to a magic show and the magician says to somebody in the audience, and we don't know each other, that could be part of the trick. Does that make sense?
It does.
Because have you ever seen Penn and Teller live?
Several times. Remember, we
Did you
talked
see them
about the
do-
Ayn Rand first page.
Yes, and did you see the bullet catch?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so they do one trick in their show, the bullet catch, where they aim a gun at each other, and they fire the gun, and then the bullet ends up in Teller's mouth, and it's a bullet that's been marked by the audience. And it's a pretty amazing trick, am I right?
Yes, absolutely. It's one of those that it's not readily apparent how it was done.
I know how it's done, by the way.
Ah.
And it's not a guess. I'm not guessing. Again, I know people who are friends with Penn. I know how it's done. That's an amazing trick. But I'm not going to give away the whole trick, but let me just say, misdirection is, everyone's heard of misdirection in magic. That illusion in and of itself right there, that the way that gets accomplished is by a misdirection. And you've got to be paying very careful attention to notice the misdirection, because that's the thing about misdirection. You're not supposed to notice it. Does that make sense?
Sure.
And so that's done through misdirection. Some of the best magic in the world is done through misdirection. Now, what's not misdirection, you must have seen Lindsey Graham's calling for Vladimir Putin's assassination last night, right?
No,
Mark?
I haven't seen that. No, I have. I've been busy today.
Okay, do we have that as a clip? If we have that as a clip, let's run that, shall we? You're going to witness it. You're going to hear him say it. Listen to this. Hit it.
How does this end? Somebody in Russia has to step up to the plate. Is there Brutus in Russia? Is there a more successful Colonel Stauffenberg in the Russian military? The only way this ends, my friend, is for somebody in Russia to take this guy out. You would be doing your country a great service and the world a great service.
Now, that's a sitting U.S. senator, Mark. What's your reaction to that?
I think that's insane. I mean, we don't assassinate each other's leaders for obvious reasons, for game theory reasons. If we extinguish their leaders, they're going to assassinate ours. And that's a long-standing, unspoken rule between countries, is we don't, even in nuclear war, we don't target capitals. I mean, there are some unspoken things that we tend to want to do because somebody has to turn it off, somebody has to be in charge, and we don't want each other's people being targeted constantly. So there's a unspoken, I won't touch your people if you don't touch mine sort of culture, and they're breaking it.
Well, and he's not only doing that. Let me point out something else that Lindsey Graham's doing there. He's urging Russian citizens or people around Putin to assassinate him. He's not even saying we're going to send a CIA team in. We're going to send in SEAL Team 6 or whatever. He's saying, you know, he's like somebody pushing somebody into a fight. It's like, it's one thing. So if a Russian politician got on the air and said, I think someone in America needs to take out Lindsey Graham, that's one thing. That's, to me, worse than if he said, we're going to retaliate, we, Russia, will retaliate against Lindsey Graham. Am I splitting assassination hairs there, Mark? Or?
No, I don't think so. An assassination is an assassination. Governments don't assassinate each other's people. It's just something they don't do. Even in the spy world, that doesn't happen. You fight each other in different ways.
Right. And that's what I was saying.
You get your own people to kill you, whatever, but you don't actively do that for just almost literally obvious reasons.
Now, I said before, I'm a free speech advocate. I said I think it was a mistake, personally, of Russia. I don't like the fact that they've banned some media over there. I think they should just let it all hang out.
Well, I've never liked Lindsey Graham that much anyway. Have you seen that video of him crying, claiming, I think it's like 10 or 12 years old, but it's a video on YouTube. He says, "I love Joe Biden," and he's crying over him, and it's a strange thing.
Lindsey Graham's an odd bird, as they say, and Lindsey Graham is characteristic. You're in Atlanta, and we got Brave. We'll get to you in 1 second. But Lindsey Graham is almost a stereotype of a certain type that I see in the South of Southern man. Lindsey Graham is the kind of guy who might, let's say, own a bookstore or a bakery. Do you see where I'm going with this, Mark?
Mm-hmm.
He's a slightly effeminate Southern man. Right? Is that fair to say?
Yes.
There's a certain daintiness about Lindsey Graham that
right.
I think
His talk might tick a different way.
Right, and again, I think he'd be happier if he would just come out and say this, because here's the thing: I was thinking about Lindsey Graham, and I'm not trying to out anybody, but I'm just also not trying to be stupid the way my generation was about Freddie Mercury, let's say. We've talked about this before.
What you're saying is you think people are generally happy. All things being equal, people will be happier out of the closet.
That's what I'm saying. And I think it's one of those things. Kevin Spacey had this going for a while. Kevin Spacey was somebody, some people like, unless somebody comes out and plants their flag and says, I'm gay, a lot of people don't want to believe that they're gay, even though, like Freddie Mercury was the perfect example from Queen. When you and I were growing up, nobody knew Freddie Mercury was gay, even though, go look at Freddie Mercury footage. Look at the way he's dressed on, right, where he's in the leather outfit with the Leatherman mustache. Even I remember the Village People, there was some question by some people, Liberace's the famous one. There were people, Liberace sued. Elton John got married. That's how weird people can be about this stuff. You remember that? Elton John got married.
Yes, I
in the
do
80s.
remember.
And now you look back, you go, well, he was obviously gay. So I'm saying with Kevin Spacey, when he invited his wife, his mother, not his wife, he doesn't have a wife. When Kevin Spacey invited his mother to the Oscars, that was one of the signs that he may be, as he later admitted, a gay American. And with Lindsey Graham, you know, most guys in his position at his age, they have their wives and kids on the podium with them, helping him get votes. Lindsey's not doing that, right? Maybe he's just never met the right girl. Except, come on, that's what people say about guys who are gay, who they don't want to admit are gay. They haven't met the right girl yet. Maybe he's never going to meet the right girl. So I'm going to say, I'm not trying to out somebody like Rock Hudson was out or whoever, where people, it was not widely known Rock Hudson was gay when he passed away. That was a shock to a lot of people. I'm opposed to outing, but with Lindsey Graham, it's not outing. It's come on. 202-521-1320, Brave in Atlanta. What's on your mind?
Hey, what's going on, guys? So I firmly believe your comments earlier about Zelensky or the reporting that's kind of circling, the rumor reporting, I guess, that's circling that Zelensky is in hiding or is taken off somewhere. I firmly believe that because usually when some of these countries that have been puppets or are facing the guns of America, usually those leaders disappear, bounce, they get up out of there because their time is limited. But so
right.
I doubt that. But what I did want to comment on is so I'm seeing in the media a lot of reporting saying that Western media, I guess I should say mainstream media, that Russia has not been able to accomplish what they want to accomplish, and they're losing it, and they're not making any.
Yes.
Meanwhile, when I see all the independent reporting and things coming out of Russia, people on the ground and stuff like that, it's quite apparent that Russia has a firm grip on their military action. So just judging everything that's going, this is complete conjecture, right? Just judging everything and the links that the U.S. has gone to that really just seem insane. Like Lindsey Graham coming out and saying what he's saying, the way that media is being suppressed and shut down, and I do believe I firmly do believe that's at the behest of the U.S. I think that we're kind of desperate right now. It looks. I mean, if I'm just a guy judging it with my own street sense, right, and my own common sense and my sense from my time as a service member, it really comes off to me as if we are desperate right now, and the tactics that we are taking are the tactics of a desperate nation or a desperate elite conglomerate. Is, I guess, the best way I could put it. And I know that.
Well, let me give you a phrase to throw in there and see if you agree with it. A desperate empire of lies. Would you agree with the empire of lies part there that Putin said?
Yeah, I definitely agree with it. I mean, there's no way around that, right? And we've been in empire of lies for some time now. But going back to the Great Reset thing that I firmly believe in, and the Great Narrative thing that I firmly believe in, I think the cards have been kind of laid out. Whether you believe in the Great Reset or not, I'm speaking to anybody listening. It's been said for some time now, and I think we all agree that we are switching from the U.S. hegemony and U.S. being the main, on the globe. That being the case, it would appear that Russia and China are on their way up to the top floor, to the VIP section, right? And so I think that, if I can use an analogy, America's that one guy in the bar who used to be the guy, and now he's drunk and he's getting drugged out. And he's just trying to grab onto whatever he can grab before he gets thrown out of the bar. That's what it seems like. That's what it feels like.
No, I know, Brave. I agree with that. I think it's a fair analogy in this case. And I've noticed a lot of – this is why I said, even though I'm a free speech person, I understand what's going on, which is there's lying war propaganda whose attempt is to demoralize Russia and Russians into not knowing the truth. That I agree. Mark, from what you've seen, first off, you know, ex-Marine, you've been very good in your analysis on this. There's no freaking way Ukraine's military could beat Russia's military. Just even on paper, just in sheer numbers. Correct?
Absolutely true. And of course, you have to define words like, you know, what does the word beat mean and that kind of stuff. But let's assume that the goal is to take over the Ukraine, okay? I don't see any way they can be stopped outside of foreign intervention. And that opens up a completely different, you know, loop of danger and processes that have unintended consequences. But
no,
yeah.
Right. Yeah, and have you seen any indication that Russia is not executing this militarily in a way that's just purely from a military standpoint? Have they been doing a good job from what you've seen?
Well, one of the problems is just trying to understand exactly what's going on. What I don't understand is why they would leave the Eastern Front just wide open and allow resupplies to come in. I would have some kind of a plan to deal with that, even if it was a quick combination paratroop, panzer drive, just to maintain a presence in there to keep that sort of thing from happening, because you got to stop resupply. But it seems like, this is what I noticed now, this is what I've noticed, because I've watched, in our lifetime, Lee, how many wars have we watched on TV? Quite a few, right?
Yes.
And we have a perception of what it looks like when there's a war going on, whether it's Iraq, whether it's, whether it's the Balkans, that sort of a thing, whether it's Bosnia. So we have an understanding, we get pictures and things. But what I've certainly seen some destruction. I've certainly seen some pictures of some firing, but I've seen like a burning tree. I've seen, 4 or 5 burning buildings. I've seen a whole bunch of what can only be described as propaganda. They're not even trying to show that there might be another way to look at this. And so what that tells me is that there's some kind of an agenda on the media that they need to make this look like it is Hitlerian, which it's clearly not. If Russia, just like if we really wanted to have won in Afghanistan, we could have. We would have just destroyed the population and then started over. But assuming we didn't want to be that ruthless, what I'm saying is it looks to me like the Russians are advancing and they're trying not to be exceptionally ruthless to the extent that they can in an aggressive war type environment. But it seems pretty clear to me.
Well, and against an enemy who's hiding artillery by apartment buildings, who's using people as human shields. When they're out giving people AK-47s and Molotov cocktails, that's using your population as human shields, in my opinion. But coming up right after this, great analysis, Mark, as usual. Allison Hayden, she's a candidate for Congress in California. And God bless her, she's brave enough to say what she thinks and to come on Sputnik and say what she thinks. No censorship. This is a free speech zone. Allison Hayden is joining us right after this on The Backstory.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show by any means necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back. You're listening to The Backstory, 105.5 FM, AM 1390. Sorry about that. I spilled my coffee in the break. That's how talented I am. But you're back on The Backstory. Join now, first-time guests, and we are very happy. Anytime anybody running for anything has the guts to show up on the show, I'm always happy, Mark. I got to say it. And the reason why is because I know we're a free speech zone, and that any candidate who comes on, and I mean any candidate, you're going to get a fair hearing. We're not going to try to put words in your mouth. And you would think candidates would flock to us, Mark. No, they're not. And most of them because they're chicken. But I could tell immediately that Allison Hayden, you're running for the 14th now, is that correct?
Yes, it was the 15th, but with redistricting, we're now the...
No, and that's why, that's hence my confusion, because you ran for the 15th last in 2020, correct?
Correct.
And so the redistricting, tell people if they aren't familiar with California congressional districts and how would they be, where the 14th/15th is now. Where is the 14th in California?
Well, it really is most of Alameda County. It has kind of a number of cities associated.
Tell them to call back. Yeah, go ahead. Keep going.
Northern Fremont. We have the Hayward, Castro Valley. We lost some, so we lost San Ramon. So actually now it's really more of Alameda County.
No, and I'm familiar with it. I'll just say one thing, because my dad actually grew up in Alameda. And Oakland and Berkeley back in the 40s. My dad grew up, and I've lived in San Leandro, so I know that general area fairly well, that East Bay-ish area. But, I saw a specific California question, but Allison, you're on. Our guest co-host today is economist, entrepreneur, ex-Marine, Mark Frost. Mark, Allison, Mark.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, Mike.
I'm doing quite well, and I hope you are too.
It's a happy Friday. The skies are blue in California. Not too many chemtrails.
Yay!
Well, no. So let me ask you a little bit about that area where you're in now. You say over the Fremont area. Again, I know that area pretty well. So a few years ago, I was doing some research in Oakland and San Francisco, and I took a lot of Uber and Lyfts. And I would talk to the drivers, and I realized a place like Fremont, let's say, that area out there, Vallejo, those other towns out there, those used to be the way outskirts. That was like the hinterlands for the Bay Area. But what had happened was it had gotten so expensive in San Francisco and places like that it started to be the only place people could afford to live were places like Vallejo and Dublin and places like that. That was a few years ago when I was talking to people. I could tell how the makeup of the Bay Area was changing, where places like that used to be on the outskirts had become bedroom communities for people who worked in, even Oakland had become very expensive. And San Francisco, impossibly expensive. Am I getting that more or less right? That's what's happened in that area, Allison?
Oh, spot on. People are having to commute ridiculous, 2 hours each way to go to work in order just to be able to afford where they live. And little ghettos for teachers. They're reconfiguring the landscape. I think with the fires and a lot of insurance companies not willing to, to really families rebuilding, they're basically changing the configuration of the Bay Area, so that SB 9 and 10 also brought in new zoning. They want to do away with single-family zoning. So we are looking at they're redesigning what the Bay Area is going to look like.
And when I realized what was going on, now I'm going to use a term, it sounds like hyperbole, but it's not, a war on the middle class. Because what I just described, I want to explain, and tell me if I'm wrong or if I'm being mean to poor people. There's two groups of people who can live in places like San Francisco, the very rich or the very poor. And the reason the very poor can live there is there's subsidized housing, right? So if you're very poor, you can live there. And if you're very rich, you can live there. But if you're a working stiff, good luck. There's no way. Am I right that it's right? And people don't get that because they think, oh, it's for the rich. Yes, it's the rich, but also a lot of these Democrat programs have made it so that there's no middle class. There's no middle anymore. It's either like you're at the bottom end, homeless, pooping on the street, right? Or you're very rich. And so you lose the middle class working person sense of community. It's not a place you'd go and raise a family or anything like that. And I think it's very dangerous long term. And I'm seeing, Mark, have you seen that phenomenon? You're out by Atlanta. Have you seen that phenomenon at all where the cities become too expensive to live in? So people move out on the outskirts and they leave a city that's rich and poor, and that's it.
Yeah, I experienced it because I myself lived in San Francisco. I mean, I'm the stereotypical guy that went from San Francisco to Dallas, Texas, because Southern Methodist University hired me. And there was a job opportunity out there. I looked at the benefits and the costs and the cost of living and all that kind of stuff and just the general lifestyle. And I'm like, well, looks like I'm going to be a Texan. And that was 25 years ago. And so, you know, what San Francisco does from an economic perspective, you know, I believe that we have to protect our environment. But there's a dark side to environmentalism. It's a tool. It's a boot by which people that have land can step on the neck of the people that don't have it. And that's almost the rule in San Francisco. So if you go to places like Atherton and you start measuring carbon footprints and you see these, you know, 2-acre estates that have, you know, very high market values, they've used all of their political power to stop new development from coming into San Francisco. So now it's just basically supply and demand. Supply grows relatively slowly and population increases, demand for housing increases, and so average rent goes up. And if you're a landlord, then you get a lot of rent, basically.
Yeah.
Allison, again, does that comport with your experience as a resident and a candidate?
Well, you know, what we're seeing is, especially with the COVID, you know, people having to leave, foreclosures are up, and SB 9 and 10 is really backing a building boom in these kinds of pack and stack housing. What they're wanting to do is to move people into urban areas around BART, all around this Green New Deal kind of thing. So that, you know, and even on the tax issue, the 1031 really trying to get rid of the 45 days that you have to sell your property and invest in another. So really owners are being hit hard.
Absolutely.
The middle class, those who have just, you know, maybe one investment. I have a friend that just sold her place in Hayward because of all of these complaints, and she could never get any support from the city council. And she took her money to Arizona. And, you know, she, right now, when the 1031 has not really been, we haven't lost it on its way, but so she can reinvest in Arizona in a red state because California is not the place.
No, and it is tragic to me, and it's really sad because, as I mentioned, I grew up, I'll mention a place that, Allison, you'll know, you may have heard of it, but I'm an alumni. I went to Chabot Community College, so you know right where I'm talking about.
I do.
Right, back in '79, when my grandparents had a place in San Leandro, and so I went to school out there, but that area, Hayward, San Leandro, I was a teenager there, and I love California, and I'm sure you do too. And it is so tragic to me what's happened to California. It hurts my heart when I go out there. And do you know, is there that sense? I can't be alone. There's a lot of people who it hurts them to see the beauty and genuine intellectual diversity and just all the things that made California great. It feels like that's really gone. What do you say, Allison?
You know, you're exactly right. We'd had this beautiful mosaic of races, ethnicities, skills, talents. You know, we have so many immigrants in California from everywhere, and we've coexisted, worked together. It's actually we were making music until a lot of this political division really and stoking fires of racism, separating people. But, you know, California is so rich in every way, resources, oil. We have so much potential. In our district alone, we have a lot of grazing land. In my move in this campaign is I will want to attract a Space Force station. You know, bring it here, bring other industry, return the jobs to California. Bring in apprenticeship programs, give raise the level of our high school education so that they are actually competent to get jobs and know how to comport themselves in the workplace, you know, upon high school graduation. We don't need to throw out all this free money for college and everything. In many countries of the world, high school graduation rates are far higher than the U.S. California is 44 out of the 50 states in the U.S., but U.S. worldwide we are below the 50% mark of level of graduation competency. So we have a lot to do. We can do a lot. It's not that hard. We just need a political will to do it. And in Alameda County, we have the opportunity with all of our diverse cultures and people's backgrounds and skills to do something amazing here. So, Eric Swalwell, who's been there, is all about really taking apart what is America. And he wants to extend entitlements and, everything for free. This is not... We know that if the government's paying for it, they're going to tell you what you're going to do with that money. So they're going to tell you where you're going to live. They're going to tell you where you're going to school and what you're going to study. And this kind of what kind of medical benefits, what operations can you get? All of these kind of extensions of government that Eric Swalwell is pushing is going to devastate California, devastate our district. And, I'm diametrically opposed to what he stands for. And I think that most Americans, when I go out door to door and I talk to people, my campaign is not about what party I'm in, because it's way beyond party anymore. This is really about whether we want the America that we've had. And people don't talk party, but they are disgusted with the way government is right now. So I think this is a propitious moment for us to regain our country. If we can step out for candidates that are running, there are a number of us that feel the same. And if we push forward America, bringing back jobs, America first values, I believe that we can take back this country, but we are at this moment of a tide turning one way or the other. So I'm really looking forward to the fight, because I believe that we can do it. And I'm here in the tunnel or in the trenches, and the more people that I talk to, people on the bridges for the freedom last week in Castro Valley, we had this great overpass presence for people with the truckers, supporting the truckers, the Freedom Convoy. And there were people, Democrats, they were crawling up on the overpass and they just saw it and parked and got up. So, people are up to take America back. And I think that this is a great time. I'm so grateful for this radio show and this opportunity now to speak to your audience and to say, wherever you are, whatever you're wherever you're listening from, to just, grab a flag, get on an overpass. You'd be amazed how many people are going to join you, because Americans want America, the America that we grew up with, and not the one that they're pushing.
Now, let me ask you this, Allison. Was 2020 your first race as a politician?
Yes. Oh, no.
Did you have a background?
A member. I've been twice elected as a member of the Central Committee, but, yeah, beyond that.
Yeah, but as a Congress, to run for Congress or something like that. So I'm curious about your thing, but let me just say, you are, and again, take this everyone, you're missing out on the big political movement. Make Ukraine great again is obviously where it's at right now.
Right.
Where everybody's, forget the American flag, patooey on that. It's the blue and yellow flag. Again, it's nice colors. But
right.
I noticed you were, and I think it is so brave of you, and you can tell people, when you came on, we did not say to you, well, you've got to come in and talk about how much you love Vladimir Putin. We didn't give you any real screening at all, right? We just said, come on and say what you think, correct?
Exactly. You just said, wow, you said that, come on the show. So I appreciate it.
No.
I tweeted that about looking at all the people that are backing it, and then make your decisions. I mean, and look at today. Who was it? The Congress, the senator,
Lindsey Graham,
who said that he wanted to assassinate Putin. Senator Graham. My God, I thought these guys are all exposing themselves for who they are, and there is as the military-industrial complex. And sorry.
Well, no, and I was going to say, and Senator Graham, of course, was one of the Gang of Eight. Was one of the 4 Republican senators pushing for amnesty for illegal aliens. And again, as someone who grew up in California, I had plenty of Mexican-American friends whose parents had come here legally. And I saw how illegal immigration was part of what was, it's not about being anti any race or whatever. It's not at all about that. I saw how illegal immigration was destroying Southern California, and I assume it's a big part of what's happened also in Northern California, correct?
Oh, of course, and it's undercutting the wages of Americans. It's terrible. Nobody wants it, and people, I was an immigrant. Most of us are immigrants if we're not First Nation, right? It's Pennsylvania, but when you're out and about, I'm amazed when I was getting signatures, how many people who are still in the process of becoming citizens and who are working here and are doing it the right way. And they couldn't sign my papers, but they said, no, we're here because of law and order, because you have immigration laws, and there is a path to citizenship, just as there is in Mexico, as there is across the world. Every country has its immigration procedures and protocols, and we haven't enforced ours. And so because we haven't, all of a sudden you're a bad guy if you're for enforcing immigration. Now, I am not in favor of the anchor baby thing, so that would be a reform that I would definitely, stand for.
Right. In other words, the idea that if you have a baby in the U.S. and you're not a citizen, that baby is a citizen. And I agree with that completely. And it's been, that situation has been abused, but it doesn't make any sense, right? And that's not anti-baby. It doesn't make any sense. Mark, do you have any questions for candidate constitutional conservative Allison Hayden?
Yeah, I just want to say that I think she touched on something that's very profound, especially from an economics, political economy perspective. She talked about the demise of the middle class and how we're moving into an almost bimodal society where you're either the working poor or you're in the far upper class, one of the two type of things. And she talked about the erosion of faith in our institutions, especially the media, government, those sorts of things. And you can't have a thriving capitalist republic with that type of culture going on. And so it has to be changed. And the only way to change it is, as Allison said in this interview, is from the grassroots level and people like her doing the work she's going to do. I'm at the point in my political life now where I'm not voting issues anymore. I'm voting for people that I find to be competent, to be good-hearted, and that are capable of making tough choices, especially once they get into office. And I'm voting more for a general type of person that I like and have faith in and believe will go in, learn the hard topics, and make the right decisions.
So do you want to chuck Mark out of that, Allison?
You know, I think what you said about media and people's ability to make decisions, I appreciate you bringing that up again, because I'm involved with a lawsuit about the vote in 2020. It's actually about correcting the vote, but in America, the biggest concern is voter integrity. I can see right now, because if our vote doesn't count, all of this is kind of a charade. The people's voices. We can jump up and down on overpasses or go to school board meetings and complain and do, advance all these things. But until the people really have the power to take elected officials, unelect them, that's the only way. And the media has completely, it brainwashes people so that you can only make a decision if it's informed. Well, what are you informed by? A media that is very much agenda-driven. So
Or you have people who only get their news from whatever, say Facebook.
Exactly.
That's the only source, so it's an echo chamber, and they stay the same for 5 years,
And propaganda, even about Ukraine. Look at that. Everything that's going on. And so, love him or hate him, Trump really brought out fake news. And many people are aware, and they are looking for other sources of information. But, habits are hard to die. And they still go on, and they listen. And fear is what's driving many people's decisions today, because the media has just been unrelenting in their campaign.
Now, Allison, this has been a great interview, and I really appreciate you coming on the show. We're almost out of time. Tell people how they can find your website if they want to find out more about you, maybe be part of your campaign. How do they find out more about Allison Hayden?
Oh, I'd love that. Thank you. I'm at AllisonDigit.com.
Wait, I'm sorry. There was some noise. So we lost you. Say that again.
The URL is AllisonDigit4Congress.com. And Allison is spelled Alison.
Okay, Allison 4 Congress. There we go.
Exactly.
Allison Hayden, thanks so much for joining us. Say hi to everyone on East 14th Street. Say hi to him for me. I don't know who's on there anymore, but anyway, my old stomping grounds. I saw Rocky Horror Picture Show many times on East 14th Street in 1979. But Allison Hayden, thanks so much for being part of the show today. We'd love to have you back anytime. Great co-hosting by Mark Frost. We do get interesting people, don't you think, Mark?
We do.
We got
I'm
more coming
on
up.
her page
Ted
now.
Wall. There we go. Good job. There we go. We got more coming up right after this short break on the best damn radio show in the world. I'm Lee Stranahan, repping San Leandro. This is the backstory.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are back. It is time for the final hour of the week of the best damn talk show in the world. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory. And it's a Frosty Friday series joined by economist, entrepreneur, progressive rock drummer, Eagle Scout, motorcycle rider, Mark Frost. And thanks again to Allison Hayden for joining us. And again, you know, I know that Chabot Community, this is how old I am, Mark. So I went in Hayward, there's a community college called Chabot Community College. I went there in 1979, and do you know what I studied? This will date me, but you'll know what it is. I studied Fortran.
Yes, I know Fortran very well.
Right, I knew you would, because old school nerd. But Fortran, for these kids today, have no idea. Fortran was a very popular computer language, especially on mainframes.
It's the greatest thing ever written as far as computers go. And let me tell you why. Guess what it powers? Both Voyager spacecrafts.
Oh, does it? Yeah, Fortran still, there's still bureaucracies around the country that use that.
Because it doesn't take very much memory to run instructions.
Well, I got a story I'll tell you in a second. Let me do the boom. Ted Rawls joining us this hour to close out the week here on The Backstory. So I know you're a drummer, but you know music. So do you know who Stanley Jordan is? Do you remember Stanley Jordan?
He rings a bell. I don't know offhand.
He was a jazz guitarist, and Stanley Jordan used to play two-handed tapping. He used to play his guitar almost like a piano. And so that would allow him to do bass and lead lines that were very complex simultaneously. Does that make sense?
Sort of.
So, because in other words, if you think about it, if you're playing with a piano, your left hand can be playing the bass notes, but your right hand can be playing a melody, right? And that's harder to do if you're strumming a guitar. It's difficult. But if you're tapping it with your left hand and your right hand, you can do stuff like that. And he was a jazz guitarist, really talented jazz guitarist. And I was talking to Todd Rundgren, the great musician, once, because Todd programs. And he said, you know what, and this is a language I'll guarantee you remember this one too. We're talking about computer programming. He said, do you know what Stanley Jordan knows how to program? And I said, no, because I didn't know. He said, APL. Do you remember APL at all?
No, I don't think I do.
APL was a really weird computer language.
APL.
Things like BASIC, for instance, were more or less in English. You would say, 4x equals 1 next or whatever. It would be in English. Print was the word print. APL was all in like symbols.
Okay.
So if you looked at an APL program, it was like looking at hieroglyphics, Egyptian hieroglyphics, or a Greek tablet or something. It was a very strange language. So it was the kind of thing that, like, it's impressive if somebody could program it, because they'd have to learn a whole new literal language.
So it was an assembly language is what it was.
Kind of. It was one level up from assembly. But rather than do it with words, so, assembly is sort of like base level, ones and zeros. Everything ultimately in computers is ultimately ones and zeros. But up a level from that, there's languages that make the ones and zeros easier to understand. And APL was a weird way of doing it, did it through symbols. So there we go.
Okay.
But
cool.
Let's keep.
Seems to me.
Yeah. So you learn something new and obscure here nearly every day. But great conversation with Allison Hayden.
I enjoyed it.
the thing I was talking about, I really did figure that out talking to Uber and Lyft drivers, is that San Francisco, because this is what among the things I don't like about Democrats, is they don't want to acknowledge that, I'll say it again, if you're in San Francisco, you can afford to live there if you're very rich. And you know, everybody loves to hate the rich.
I don't hate the rich, because every time I've been unemployed, I found a rich person to give me a job.
No, no, that's right. But you know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
the rich
exactly.
are an easy, the rich are an easy target. Right. The poor, I've seen a lot of Democrats freak the F out. If you try to say something like, people, like I'm going to say something that's controversial if you're talking to Democrats and a lot of people on the left, not all of them, that a factor in how well people do economically is whether they're lazy or not. They don't like the idea of saying that anybody is poor because maybe they're kind of lazy. And I'm not saying that because I hate the poor. Realistically, though, Mark, am I right that
well, yeah,
a person's,
because, you know, why are the poor poor? Let's just get down to basics. Why are the poor poor? I mean, it's obvious. Because they do not save. They spend everything they have.
My old friend Tim Jennison, he's the one who's friends with Penn Jillette from Penn & Teller, had a company called New Tech. Tim told me, when I met Tim, he said, I used to be a commie hippie with my hair down. Tim's a fantastic musician, among other things. And he used to have hair halfway down his back, same as me. I used to have that. But he said, I lived in a commune. I said, really? Because he was an Ayn Rand fan, arch capitalist at this point. And he said, yeah, here's what I learned. There's two kinds of people, Tim told me, who live in communes. There's the people who do all the work, and they keep the commune going. They clean the kitchen, they make the food. Then there's the lazy ones who leech off of them. And Tim said, I was smart. I was one of the lazy ones. And I've never lived in a commune, but I completely believe it. I believe that in a commune, there would be some people, right? Mark, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say there's volumes in the literature on that. There's people that have done their dissertations on communes. There's game theoretical articles on it. There's, you know, for instance, in almost every single one that's been chronicled, the women did more of the so-called household work. Now, why is that? Why would you think that is? What's the causal on that? Was it oppressive men?
They're broads.
Well, what it is that the men would do it in the controlled experiments. The men would do it if the women did not do it. But the women would do it before the men would do it, and therefore the men would never do it.
Yeah, no, I believe it. And I also believe that, look, if somebody else is going to do the cooking every night, and you don't have to, but you're still going to get fed, there's a certain, when Tim said, the punchline to that story is him saying, I was smart, I was one of the lazy ones. He was being honest. He was smart. Because, you know, look, if I'll put it like this, if they called me and said, Lee, you don't need to show up to do the radio show at all anymore, but we're still going to pay you. I love doing the radio show, but you know what? It might not start immediately, but after a while, I'd stop showing up. Sorry, I love doing the show, but why show?
Well, yes. So, for instance, there's studies at all sorts of factories over this very thing, and it's just absolutely clear, if, people at factories, especially union factories, if one person is a superhuman performer and has high productivity, that person makes the same money or maybe even less than a person with low productivity. And so the lucky ones are lazy as a strategy. How's that?
No, right. And that's very smart, actually, if you think about it. Because why? There's no incentive. Here's what it's happened. It's not like I wouldn't do anything. I'd do something else, but I'd still collect my check. And so I'm being, in a sense, more productive because I can now pursue something else. In fact, I had a weird realization last night in the middle of the night because I was having trouble sleeping.
Uh-oh, you're in trouble now.
Well, no, that in a sense, I just love my life. I've got a studio. I've got equipment. I've got, due to the fact I've got drums. Not only do I have drums, but when I hit the drums, they're literally triggering samples from Neil Peart's drum kit or from the Elton John's drummer's drum kit or whoever, or Peter Erskine's drum kit.
And it gives you a taste of that. It's a wonderful feeling.
Yes, and I've got a guitar that can be 20 different guitars, and I don't play. I don't take advantage of all the cool stuff that I have. I have $500,000 in synthesizers. If I bought them in the 80s, I got a Fairlight, a Synclavier, an emulator, and I paid like $100 for them because that's what they cost now. These are the ones that Peter Gabriel made his big albums on, the Fairlight, for instance. I have one. They're now in software. But am I making an album? Apparently not. And so I realized that, in a sense, everybody out there right now is very lucky. And I think too many times people don't recognize all of the opportunities. And this is going to take me right to the rubles. You said you're buying rubles. Now, a lot of people might think, well, a lot of people might think that's insane because they're hearing the bottoms drop out of the ruble. My guess is that's why you bought rubles. Talk about your reasoning there, Mark, what you're doing.
Sure. It actually came to me while I was doing some research on the war on drugs, and I was reading about Joseph Kennedy and how he made all his money that he would later make an even larger fortune in the stock market, that he used his liquor profits during Prohibition to invest in the stock market on Black Thursday. And so, to me, having sampled the media and seeing, I think you can dislike Putin, you can even dislike Russia, and engage in a conversation that's not propagandistic. And the entire media is doing that. I mean, the entire media, it's like a memo went out on teletype or something, and it went to all the people who talk, and it said, from this point on, we're going to talk like this. Because each station is doing the same thing, saying the same thing, basically, with the exception of a show here and there on a, and I find it just weird. And so what that tells me is the media has built up a Dutch tulips, a Dogecoin, they have built up a bubble. And what I believe is that the ruble now is undervalued relative to the dollar, and the dollar is overvalued relative to the ruble. So I like to buy undervalued things, even if it's friends. I like to get friends when they're on the up, not when they're on the down, as far as getting new friends, things like that. So buying undervalued assets is a good strategy. And clearly, to me, the ruble is an undervalued asset. I don't see the things that the media is saying is happening as to be happening. I also don't see the evidence for the analysis that they've made to be very persuasive, other than they have a premise, they have a bias, and they don't like what's going on, and there's one particular dogmatic paradigm that's acceptable to have. And this is becoming one of those issues to where if somebody asks you, for instance, if, like at a party, if somebody said, Mark, what do you think of what's going on with Putin and Russia? Well, if they'll sit down with me for 5 minutes, I'll tell them. I'll tell them what I dislike about Russia, my gripes about Putin. I'll tell them the mistakes I think that are being made. I'll tell them all about that. But I'll also tell them the Russian point of view that is not irrational. It's not insane. It doesn't come from a madman. It comes from a history over a good 200 years of aggression against Russia that has created a sort of cultural paranoia. And it's I've said many times on this show and others that I think culturally Russians and Americans have a lot in common. And one of the things that we have in common is we tend to gravitate to these polar patriotic poles. And right now, this is being whipped up by the media. I mean, I've witnessed it anecdotally by myself. I think I've shared with you. I've purposely scanned back and forth, watching 15 seconds here, 15 seconds there, and I did that for like 10 or 15 minutes several times, and they're all saying the same thing. And nobody's going in and saying things like, okay, if Putin is truly a bloodthirsty dictator, why is Pussy Riot, why did they get a relatively light sentence? Why did, what's his name, what was the Russian oligarch that got in trouble?
Khodorkovsky, Mikhail Khodorkovsky.
Yeah, Khodorkovsky. Why wasn't he executed? Why was he released? These are things that...
And Mark, let me just say, because I got to point out one thing, that in the land of the free, the home of the brave, you can't say the name of that band because of the FCC. So be careful. No, I'm serious. It's ridiculous. But I got to warn you, watch out. You can't say the name of that band. Think how stupid that is. But go ahead, Mark. So
yes, and it's ridiculous. And then what it does is it actually ends up helping the people that they're mad at. Because what's going to happen is the world needs oil. Oil is fungible. It doesn't matter whether you buy oil from an economic perspective. It doesn't matter who you buy it from, because oil is a commodity. And so whether we buy Russian oil, whether we don't buy Russian oil and buy Iranian oil, the world price of oil is still impacted. And so this is yet another strategy by this administration that, in my opinion, seems to be this non-caring attitude about the lower end of the American worker. We just got through talking about the eroded middle class. We're getting into a more bimodal distribution of wealth. And people that are at the lower end of the middle class, this is just another choice by the American government that seems to be harming Americans. We're obsessed over protecting this border of Ukraine, and we don't care about our own border. These are the things that real Americans are upset over, and most of them couldn't even point out Ukraine on a map with any great accuracy.
Mark, I want to ask you. I want to ask you about one thing Russia's done, which is they have very little debt. But first, I want to make sure we get to calls 202-521-1320. Our friend Tarif. Tarif, what is on your mind?
Thank you for taking my call, gentlemen. First, I'd like to say free Julian Assange. I have a few comments to talk about. First, I'd like to say this. India is upset that they had their citizens in Kharkov was shot at, and the Indian citizens was shot at in the Kharkov city, and asked the Russians to try to negotiate with the Ukrainians to pull them out because there was a neo-Nazi that shot at them. In another city, SUMY Summer, they had 5 Indian students when neo-Nazis shot at them. Also, you had it's rumored that the Russians might nationalize the West assets in Russia. That's really going to make the West very upset if they nationalize the foreign assets in Russia, Western assets in Russia. Two countries are going to lose 60 to 70% of their manufacturing capability because they deal with Russia a lot. That's Germany and Italy. So that's going to be two major things. Two factors in Europe. They're going to lose a lot. Yeah. That's it. I appreciate y'all taking my call.
No, Sharif, I appreciate bringing up India. I was going to bring up India with Mark, actually, so it's a good segue. But yeah, the false flags against Indian students, using Indian students as pawns, is disgusting on the part of Ukraine. 202-521-1320. Let's go to Ingrid, Ingrid on the left, involved with the peace movement. Have you been called a tanky, and not because you dress like a skank, Ingrid, but have you heard that term, tanky?
Well, I have no idea. I've seen it and I've pondered what it meant. I thought it meant somebody who was in the tank for some side or another. I had no idea.
But it's something you've heard thrown around by people on the left, correct? I saw it the other night on Facebook.
No, I have not heard it on the left. I've seen it written on Un's Review, which is not left.
Oh, interesting. I saw a couple leftist friends of mine were talking about tankies. I didn't know what the hell they meant, but then I started to figure it out. Anyway, Ingrid, you weren't calling about tankies. What's on your mind?
Yeah, well, no, but I'm not a good person to ask because I don't have any friends anyway. As you know, I've been canceled by everyone. But propaganda is on my mind. But just a quick question, maybe someone will know the answer. I read the other day that Russia actually doesn't have the death penalty, regardless of who they'd use it on. But the propaganda on the Ukrainians has been fierce. And Zelensky, for instance, acting like people are going to be all killed. One of the things he did a while ago was he handed out heavy weaponry like Kalashnikovs to just any civilian. Said, just come and get them and go out and shoot Russians. And what wound up happening was that different gang members got a hold of them. They went around settling scores. Apparently, the day after he handed out weapons to civilians, like 60 people were killed by other Ukrainians. But they've been told that the plot here is that they should be afraid of being made part of Russia, and that's not even what Russia wants to do. They just want to change the government and make it not unfriendly to them.
Yeah, that's always been my take as well, Ingrid, and I've said that when people have asked me about it, because I've been doing these spaces sometimes on Twitter, and sometimes people politely ask me questions, and then I'm nice. And if you're rude, I will talk about your mom, who is a tanky in the dress skanky sense of the word. But if people are nice to me and they ask where I think it's going, I have no indication from any of the guests I've ever talked to that Putin or Russia wants to make Ukraine part like another province of the Russian Federation. They want a buffer. Is that the general impression you're getting, Mark? Mark Frost?
Sorry, I had you on mute. But yes,
go ahead.
it is. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, it is the impression I've had, and it's not just the impression I've recently had. It's something, I've been studying Russian history, with more specifically around World War II, for quite some time. And so this is something that's just kind of normal. One of the lessons that Russia learned in both wars, even going back to even going back to France, if you want, is that they needed some buffer zones. They needed something to protect them from a surprise attack from the West, because it happened twice. And you've heard the expression, fool me once, shame on me, And so I think it's a rational concern that the West might do something mean and attack Russia. It's happened before. It's happened twice by the same country. This country's already kind of becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, and it is a reasonable concern that Russia has that they have a buffer in there. And I like to tell that story because nobody knows it. Mongolia actually applied to be part of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union refused them. Huge area. And they did it because they liked the buffer zone that Mongolia provided against the Chinese. And so that's how Russia has survived since its inception, for centuries, is that its huge, large size is what keeps it together. And the West is so concentrated in population, all their population and armies are already kind of there. If you just look at a map, you'll see what I'm talking about. And then, so for Russia to attack, they have to move forces from a big giant area to a little small western little nook, if you look at the map. And then for the West to attack, all they have to do is a relatively minor redeployment, and they're already at the eastern gates of Russia, and that's what they want to avoid. Now, you might disagree with that, and I'll respect that. What I'm angry about with the mainstream media is every single one of them seem to be ignoring the counter argument or the other side of the coin. This isn't a crazy policy. It's a reasonable thing. The best way I can understand it would be like if China bought Mexico and we made a proactive decision to invade Mexico before China took it over. Ukraine has never been for very long, an independent nation. If you've ever been to Ukraine, it's certainly not the bastion of democratic goodness. I mean, I'm sorry. No insult to my Ukrainian friends, but it's not the best society that's ever been created. It just isn't.
And it's very corrupt. It's well known for that. No, Mark, let me ask you one quick question about India and economics. I saw somebody say something, and I thought it was laughable. What they said was, they literally said, Russia, if they think they can get by with just China and India as trading partners, they're ridiculous. And I'm like, I don't know. Those are two big countries, China and India, with both very robust tech sectors as well, among other things. So would you mind if you had a trade with two countries and they were India and China? Does that sound that bad to you, Mark?
Well, first of all, it isn't going to just be two.
Right.
Trading with only two creates a completely different, way of just doing your entire macroeconomic strategy. But I don't like the premise because it's not going to be two. It's going to be dozens and dozens. Just follow the history of these things. It isn't like this is the first time this sort of thing has popped up in human economic history. It's been going on, and we've been chronicling it since the times of the Greeks. I mean, this is what happens, in governments. And, so it's no surprise in that sense. I don't, see in any sense in that, into that regard.
And one of the things I know Russia's done in the past few years is they have very little debt. Russia has almost no debt as a country.
Oh, good point for bringing that up, because you're very right. They have very low debt, and in terms of international reserves, and let's define that as anything of value that's not your own currency. It can't be your own currency. They're very high in global reserves.
There we go. We got more coming up. Ted Rawl will join us after this short 2-minute break here on The Backstory.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
When the going gets tough, the powerful want propaganda.
but we won't let them cancel the facts. Whether you're woke or drowsy, we know that you can handle the truth, and we're giving it to you every morning. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan every Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Your first stop for sanity in a world gone mad.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
Yep, and we are back on The Backstory, 105.5 FM, AM 1390 in Washington, D.C. We are joined now at the end of the week, and it's a stressful, I got to say, Mark, you're mellower than I am, I think, but I'm kind of, the whole war thing has put me a little on edge. It's stressful for me. Is it stressing you at all, or is it just me?
It's a different kind of stress because, remember, I'm a mathematical guy, and I model things. I model variables and things like that for a living. And so I'm very aware of how a tiny little variable can be geared up to be so important. Just look at World War I, how that started. An Archduke got assassinated, and the dominoes started falling. And in these situations, I just read today a headline. I've been pretty busy today. I haven't had time to read the article, but apparently the West is looking at ways to get all these weapons into Western Ukraine, at least, and along with some fighters and things like that. Well, those are acts of war. Those are acts of escalation. And so what happens is other countries' citizens are going to get killed. And now what happens? And then it escalates a little bit here. It escalates a little bit there. Finally, battlefield commanders are at an edge, their own edge. And this has a recipe of a perfect storm that could be formed. And the problem is you can't paint somebody. This is right from Sun Tzu. You can't paint somebody into a corner to where there's only one solution they have, and that's to be humiliated by you. They'll fight to the death if that's the variables. And so it looks to me like there's this media-fueled, because it seems to me the media is doing it, there's this media-fueled anti-Russia, let's escalate this thing, let's send troops over there, let's send NATO resources over there. Let's bring them into NATO now. There's this sort of mentality that I'm hearing that's becoming increasingly loud that's frightening to me, because I know how these dominoes, if you just look at the history of wars, that's how these dominoes can end up falling, and things that you didn't expect to be that big of a deal can be a very big deal.
Okay, now joining us now, you're a math guy, but now a guy who's an author, a cartoonist, and a bon vivant. Ted Rall is joining us at the end of the week. It's always great to talk to Ted. Hey, Ted. How you doing? I'm not hearing Ted. We have Ted on the line?
Hey, Lee.
There we go. Hey, Ted. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Well, I'm a little, as I was saying to Mark, I'm a little stressed. Let me ask you, have you been stressed at all by the war? Just in general, finding yourself maybe gritting your teeth at night in a way you didn't used to? Anything like that, Ted?
Yeah, well, I totally agree with your co-host. I've been feeling the same way. You know, it always makes me really nervous when the West does what it does, which is to paint people into a corner, entrap them, not provide them with any kind of graceful exit strategy, and it's terrifying. So, you know, you can easily see the escalation between two nuclear powers. It's stressing me out. You know, and obviously there's a lot of really crazy freedom fries, like, you know, escalation and ridiculous rhetoric to the point where literally, you know, Russian cats are now being banned from the United States. I mean, things have gotten really full-blown stupid. And let's not forget, the United States is not at war here. The United States literally is not involved here, not directly, not officially. So, I mean, you know, it's even more insane than Iraq, and at least the U.S. invaded Iraq.
Well, let me try to be. I have not been a good host because I just realized. I think Ted, this is the first time you've been on with Mark, correct? Ted, Mark.
I believe
Mark,
so.
Ted.
I believe so. Hey, Mark.
Pleasure to meet you, Ted.
Likewise.
Now, the thing I know about both of you that you should both know is you're both cat people.
Yes, I do cat rescue.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yes, and Ted, you've got a Russian blue.
I do.
Right? Has it been taken into custody yet?
I'm a little worried. I've been hiding him behind in a secret compartment in my apartment.
Is he
you know, thank God there's...
Is he a registered Russian asset?
he is, and you know, he's been on the lookout for Ukrainian cats, but there's been, thank God, there's no Ukrainian breeds that I know about. So I think he's safe for now.
Just as a fun fact, do you know what's special about Russian cats and Norwegian cats? Just kind of the Slavic, you know, cold weather cats in general.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing that. I will say that I did get a Russian blue specifically, not because I'm a fancy person, but because they're hypoallergenic, and my son has asthma. So I wanted a hypoallergenic cat, and it's true. You can, you know, bury your nose in his fur, and you know, very little will happen.
You won the golden buzzer. I wouldn't call them hypoallergenic, but they're very close. They have the least, I forgot the name of the protein. It's the F1V something or other protein that actually causes the allergies. And they and the Norwegian forest cat has the least amount of that allergen in their proteins. And so they're the least allergenic cat. Anyway, I thought the listeners would like that.
No,
yeah,
even though we
no Ukrainian cats. Get Russian cats. Russian blues. They're wonderful cats. They're wonderful.
They're beautiful
cats too.
and lovely.
They're pretty, and they're really sweet too.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, Ted, obviously you're a big fan of Lindsey Graham, though, and as
only
as
for
ridiculous as the Freedom Fries thing was, no one was saying, let's grab your Freedom Fry and stab someone to death with it, right? So Lindsey Graham, what do you make? Obviously, I would be shocked if you went, well, I agreed with Lindsey Graham about Vladimir Putin being assassinated. So that's not why I'm asking. But what do you think it says about the current state of the world that Lindsey Graham can come up and say that, and that he's still on Twitter?
Right, good point. I thought Twitter didn't allow threats of violence. Lindsey Graham is a nut, And he said a lot of really stupid things and toxic things in the past. And this one still manages to stagger with surprise. He is, I mean, it's just an insane thing to do. Even to say, I mean, like if let's just say he feels like that would be a good idea. Just imagine the escalation. I mean, it's like we need to bring this thing down for a soft landing. That's what responsible statesmen want. We don't need, a lot of heated rhetoric. We have way too much of that right now, and it's gotten really out of hand. And in a very short order, I mean, literally, it has never even crossed the minds of Western policymakers that, tanking one of the biggest economies in the world might bring us all down all at the same time. I mean, it's lunacy. He really needs a big, tall cup of, shut the hell up.
And it is very troubling. Now, let me take you from Lindsey Graham to the left. Mark and I were talking about this a little bit. We've talked about it a little bit with Ingrid. Have you seen what I will call the anti-war left? The people who were, pro-Assange, anti-imperialism, but they've come out hard against Russia on this. Have you noticed that same thing, Ted?
Well, sort of. I mean, I've seen a couple of people who are kind of militant pacifists, as I call them, who would definitely be, who have, just said, well, basically come out hard against Russia on this point. But the actual left, the Marxist left, that has not been where they are. I mean, my fellow travelers are all basically pointing out that the U.S. has no moral standing whatsoever to complain about any other country invading any other country for obvious reasons.
See, nobody brings that up either. Not one. As much as I've watched the media, not one channel, not one commentator has brought that up. That if an alien came to Earth and said, "What's the most violent country on Earth?" it would have to be the United States of America, right? We have initiated more violent things than anybody in modern history. I think that's a fair, accurate statement to say that's pretty much devoid of feelings and subjectivity. I think that's fair enough, right?
We're number one, USA, yeah. USA. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah. So my only point was just to confirm Ted's point was, we have an opportunity to clean up our own world, our own country, ourselves. We have a border of our own that we don't seem to kind of know what to do with. And it seems to me, given the pain that we're throwing into the middle and lower middle class and the working poor, that we ought to be very wary of making choices, regardless of consequences and how good-hearted those choices were that harm the American people. And that's what bothers me as an economist. We're making dumb, bad choices that in the big picture are not going to hurt Russia nearly as much as it hurts ourselves. That's my position.
Now, Ted, we've talked before about the leftist tradition, like, Haymarket and Matewan and stuff like that. But part of that tradition is folk singer Woody Guthrie, whose guitar said on it, "This machine kills fascists." So I think anybody who's a hardcore pacifist, remember Woody said, "This machine kills fascists." And he was talking about the Nazis. And songs like "All You Fascists Are Bound to Lose," I love that song. I've been listening to it a lot lately. "All You Fascists Are About to Lose" is literally the people that these Ukrainian Nazis worship. So I don't understand where this disconnect in other words, what I'm getting at is, Ted, the left used to be pretty clear where they were on Nazis. They were against them.
Lee, I think it started with Hillary Clinton, maybe her husband, but I think I never realized how much of a hawk Hillary Clinton was till a colleague sat me down and pointed out her record to me. She voted with the Hawks like 100% of the time. She was a hawk. And there's there was an unknown vein of hawks in the Democratic Party that I was unaware of. I just didn't realize there was that many there. And, you know, throughout a variety of different things, they've kind of shown their colors. And you know, I expected that kind of mentality from the right. They're used to it. Their fathers were that way. I mean, that's how the Republican Party has been. It's been an anti-Russia, anti-Soviet, anti-pro-NATO type thing, and nobody likes to let their anachronisms die away, you know, so that sort of a thing.
Now, Ted, you want to be a contrarian, defend Hillary Clinton, or what do you want to do on that one, Ted?
Well, I can't really be a contrarian to myself. Yeah, no, I think that's all right. You know, one thing that Americans are not talking about, I haven't even heard this critique really even that much here, so I'm glad to be able to bring it up, which is just that, you know, Americans are not good at choosing sides in foreign conflicts. I mean, you know, we got in bed with the Free Syrian Army, part of whom metastasized into ISIS after we armed and funded them. We obviously thought the Mujahideen were really cute when Dan Rather was climbing across the Hindu Kush to hang out with them in the 80s. And, you know, some of them turned into the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. You know, it's not really such this, and I think, you know, the whole fascist Nazi thing, you know, plays into that. I mean, the fact is, as far as I know, Ukraine's probably the only country in the world that has actual Nazis in the actual military, not as like sort of a weird, we get together with tiki torches every few years and walk around, you know, 0.001% of the population. Right, like actual, with swastikas and really cool outfits and flags and stuff. Like, you know, like real, like in the government, you know, acknowledged, allowed to fight in wars officially with government weapons. I mean, the world is a place with a lot of really horrible governments. And I don't know that there's any other one that has actual Quentin Tarantino-style Nazis in, you know, not that Quentin Tarantino is pro-Nazi, but like in a Quentin Tarantino movie type Nazi. You know,
Christopher Waltz style Nazis.
Exactly.
Hey guys, Ted was not deceiving us. I just looked it up. They banned Russian cats from the cat shows.
No, I know it was making up. Yeah, I talked to. Yes.
This is utterly insane. I mean, this is like a skit, Saturday Night Live skit type stuff.
And also, by the way, I
think we should ban Russian air. I think any air that comes over here from Russia needs to be blown back into Russia. That's what I think.
Well, you know, I've never talked to Vladimir Putin. I don't have a red line to him directly, but I'm going to speak for Vladimir Putin, and I'm going to do it with some degree of certainty. He doesn't care. Here's the thing. Nobody in Russia is going, okay, they banned the cats. That's it. It's all over. Shut down. Do you see what I'm saying? But
this is such virtue signaling. It's obvious what it is. Has nothing to do with helping the human, with helping the human condition in any way. And it makes it's so absurd. It's so absurdly obvious that it's funny.
They also have banned. This is true. Russian strains of African violets, the plant, the flower, are now banned from export to the United States. And I think that's probably going to, you know, that's it. Putin's going to come out and surrender because of that. I mean, it's absurd. It's so absurd.
And we have bars across the country that are no longer, they're virtue signaling by not serving vodka. Seriously,
this is a thing. So like a white Russian is going to be hard to get.
And that's my favorite drink. I can't drink anymore, but that was my favorite drink. Was a Caucasian, a white.
I
got that from Big
left.
Big Lebowski.
What are they going to do about the Black Russian? Because that's going to like really mix up the whole woke thing.
Exactly. Oh, that's a good point. That's a good point. Well, the other thing is they haven't done it yet, but I guarantee you they will. Is they haven't banned Russian dressing yet, but they'll be throwing Russian dressing away.
And what about the Russian River out in the Pacific Northwest? Is that going to be renamed, like the Freedom River or the Kiev River or I should say the Kiev River, right?
Well, do you know what secret society is perched on the banks of the Russian River? Do you know this?
No.
Bohemian Grove. The Bohemian Grove.
Good point. Yeah.
The Bohemian Grove camp is right off the Russian River, up in the northern part of California.
You mean the Freedom River? The Freedom River.
Well, let's see if the Bohemian Grove people, between their drunk peeing on trees, owl worshiping skits that they do, let's see if they end up calling for it. But Ted, are you a little shocked by how quickly so many people on the left turned on Russia? Because I agree with what Mark said, and I consider myself on the right broadly. I'm not surprised by the right doing it, because I see people still call Putin a commie, and I'm like, he's not a communist. Like, there's communists in Russia. They don't like Putin. They support the other party.
That's true.
And it is true. And
I don't think Putin's a communist. Do you? I don't know if you listen to his
He's clearly it's not even I think he's clearly critical of the Bolsheviks. There's a communist party in Russia. He ain't in it. They run against him. The actual there are literal people not calling communists. There's a communist party in Russia. Mark Sloboda's wife is part of it, a member of it. They don't like Vladimir Putin. Am I right, Ted? But why did the left turn so quickly, do you think?
Well, first of all, like I'm going to say, not the real left, the BS liberals, not actual left. But it's disturbing. Look, I think I give respect to the militant pacifists. They have their integrity. They're against war and military conflict in all cases, no matter what. And they're just being true to their ideals. But, Russophobia is very deep in this country. It goes back to the 1800s, and it's been pretty consistent. And all there really has been in between are like little periods when it abates a bit, but it never really completely goes away. So I'm not entirely shocked by this. I am surprised by the idiocy of Cold War rhetoric that's 30 years old, still popping up. Like I saw the former U.S. ambassador to Russia on Fox talking about Putin's KGB. And I'm like, well, the KGB hasn't existed in over 30 years. So you mean the FSB, and you were an ambassador and you've never heard of the FSB? Like, what do you mean? It's depressing. People still call it the Ukraine, and it's as opposed to Ukraine. And, it's just sort of like the ignorance is disturbing to me, because it's, these are people who are paid with our taxpayer dollars and should at least know about the country that they're supposedly, relating to and experts about. But apparently a cartoonist knows more than they do, which is sad.
You're not the average cartoonist, and you certainly know more than Scott Adams, let's put it like that. But he's a cartoonist too, but, you're smarter than him. So let me just say this as well. One of the things that's happening in this situation, I would say the support for Ukraine, to steal a phrase, is a mile wide and an inch deep. In other words, it's everywhere right now. You see people running the Ukrainian flags, but as you say, they still don't know a damn thing about it. Is that what you're seeing, Ted?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I mean, I'm saying people completely have jumped on board. They haven't given it any thought. They've never, I went into Afghanistan in 2001 with a guy from Britain, a journalist, who said that you Americans need a 3-city rule. And I was like, what's that? Like, you shouldn't be allowed to invade any country that the average American can't name 3 cities. And I was like, wow, we won't even be able to invade Canada at that rate. And, you know, and I think we shouldn't have strident opinions about places that, you know, only 34% of Americans, according to a poll taken a week ago, can pick out on a map. You know, we should probably take a beat, do a little dive, little Googling, you know, figure out what's going on before we start, you know, throwing away our Russian vodka and banning Russian cats and banning Russian plants. You know, maybe start thinking a little bit about what we're doing. I mean, the Ukrainian government, as I've been telling my many liberal friends, is highly problematic. It is not a government that, you know, if most Americans knew exactly what they were about or how they got installed in 2014, most good, smart, liberal Americans would be into. They wouldn't support them. I mean, and if they just like Google you know, I mean, there's an article in the in the Forward, the very reputable Jewish newspaper that's over 100 years old, from last year, a year ago, before any of this started, right? Talking about how Ukraine puts up a new monument to Nazis from World War II every week on average. Literally, a plaque on a wall, a statue, some Nazi is getting memorialized. You know, that's not happening anywhere else. I mean, and that's some whack stuff that people should check out and, you know, just stay away from. I think it's totally okay to say, I don't know what's going on over there, and I'm just gonna like not have an opinion.
Now I gotta challenge your elitist take that Americans can't name 3 cities in Canada. I certainly can. I'm going to push back. I'm an American. You got Toronto, you've got Truckertown, and then that Celine Dion, wherever that is. So there you go. There's 3. Can we invade now, Ted?
Done.
Okay, good. I'm staying away from the part with Celine Dion because, you know, she was one of the people who started doing that hand thing where it looks like she's having a conniption fit. I don't want to get too medical. When she's hitting the high notes, you know what I'm saying, where her hand goes up? I'm just saying Celine Dion helped to pioneer that trend, and it's not a good one. But Canada is the home of poutine, and so God bless them for that. But Ted, let me ask you in the couple minutes we have left yet, what did you think, what was your heart done good by seeing the unity among Americans at the State of the Union speech? Or was your heart done good by seeing the State of the Union speech at all, Ted Rall?
Well, the State of the Union address was depressing. I mean, I guess it's like Joe Biden served as a reminder that if Democrats want to achieve bipartisanship with Republicans, they can pretty much agree with everything that Republicans want, including more militarism, you know, more just generally, you know, just completely kowtowing to everything they want. And they're like, oh, that's a brilliant take on what Bill Clinton did. I'm like, Bill Clinton, you know, is exactly why the Bernie Sanders progressives split off from the party. So I don't think it's a success. The bipartisanship of, you know, let's all bash Russia, also not that exciting to me. So, you know, I would, as, you know, Rogers and Eberts would say, 2 thumbs down, but since I would only be allowed 1 thumb in this analogy, 1 thumb down.
Well, so Ted, take care of your cat, and we hope you, thanks again. Always a lot of fun to have Ted Rall on. If you want some of his merch, go to Rall.com, RALL.com. See, I'd like to get the pimping in there, pro-capitalism, Ted. I'm always trying to help out our guests here. And thanks so much to Allison Hayden. Allison for Congress, number 4. And Mark Frost, fantastic job co-hosting. A lot of fun. Thanks to all the crew. We will be back on Monday here on The Backstory.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Good evening. Welcome to the Critical Hour. We're coming to you from the capital of the United States of America, Washington, D.C., here on Radio Sputnik. I'm your host, political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist, Dr. Wilmer Leon. I'm joined here by my co-host, political analyst, Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
For the next 2 hours, we will explore and analyze the salient news stories that are impacting the global village in which we live. According to TASS, Russia takes control of a nuclear power plant in Ukraine. According to the Defense Ministry, the workers of the power plant continue servicing facilities. The Russian military are guarding and controlling the territory. What does this version of the story indicate? For insight, we turn to our first guest. It's Friday, so we're going to start the show the way we always do. With our first guest, he's an acclaimed speaker, writer, author, journalist, and political analyst. He has traveled extensively in the Middle East and in Latin America. His latest book is entitled Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts. Caleb Maupin, as always, Caleb, welcome back.
Sure. Glad to be here, as always.
So when you hear this story in Western press, Russia seized Europe's largest nuclear plant. A Russian projectile hit the plant in southeastern Ukraine overnight, igniting a fire that caused widespread alarm but triggered no release of radioactive material. The U.S. Embassy in Kyiv tweeted, "It is a war crime to attack a nuclear power plant," and President Zelensky accused Moscow of nuclear terror. The TASS report is much different. So, Caleb, it made me wonder when I read that the workers of the power plant are continuing to provide service and that the military is guarding the plant. I wondered if they were guarding the plant to protect it against a false flag operation initiated by the Ukraine at the behest of the United States. We'll start there. Caleb Maupin.
Well, I heard the UN Security Council meeting that just happened, and the Russian ambassador took to the floor, and he gave their version of events. And you listen to his version of events, it's very, very, very different than what we're hearing in mainstream media. According to him, when they got into the area, that they did take control of the plant. The Russian military was there. The military folks, they took control of the plant, but the local people who work in the power plant continued their operations, the Russian military guarding them. And then what happened was there were a group of Ukrainian nationalists who were fighting to drive Russia out, and they came to the area, and they opened fire on the Russian military folks who were guarding the plant. So the Russian military folks shot back, and as you know, the Ukrainian nationalists then retreated after being shot at, they set a fire. And this fire didn't happen at the facility itself. It happened on the property adjacent to the facility. No Ukrainian nationalists ever entered the facility. They simply went from the area near it where they shot at the Russian troops. The Russian troops shot back. A fire was set, and then it was put out. The radiation levels in the area are completely normal, and there is no danger. And the Russian ambassador, when he spoke, he was quite angry because he said, look, how would it benefit Russia to have a big cloud of radioactive smoke right on their border? Right. I mean, do people not realize how close these countries are to each other? Why in the world would Russia want to, set off a dirty bomb or have, a power plant, blow up right there? I mean, these are people who can remember Chernobyl. Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine can all remember the Chernobyl disaster. Russia would not benefit in any way from doing this.
Caleb,
this is alarmism and hysteria.
I don't know why. I don't know why the ambassador didn't call me, because I know the answer to the question. Why would Russia do it? Because Vladimir Putin is unstable. He's a madman. Yeah. He's unpredictable, and this is what crazy people do. I mean,
Russia over this alleged attack on the nuclear plant. And it was a double header for them. Not only could they demonize Russia with these unproven allegations, but they could also do something they've been trying to do for a long time, which is get rid of nuclear power. Because when it really gets down to it, why do Wall Street and London run the world? oil. We have an oil-based economy, right? Oil. And what is the biggest threat to oil? Nuclear energy. And so not only can they demonize Russia and play up the idea that Russia, a major competitor on the oil and gas markets, right, one of the top producers of oil and gas in the world, one of the top exporters, they can not only demonize them, but at the same time they can say, look how unsafe and dangerous nuclear power is. People should all be buying oil from us, and that seems to be part of their agenda. I have some other comments I'd like to make about this, if you don't mind.
Please,
May I go ahead?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm listening to the Russian ambassador talk and seeing things that are in Russian media right now that U.S. media is just ignoring really kind of, hits home for anyone who has studied the history of the Cold War. Because, in the United States, in D.C., you guys are in D.C., you've got the Washington Times newspaper, which is one of the most conservative Republican newspapers in D.C. That was owned by the Reverend Sun Myung Moon, and he was the leader of the World Anti-Communist League, which was a hostage and holding people hostage. They've actually turned a school into a temporary detention facility, and they have a bunch of civilians lined up. They opened fire on a group of Chinese residents of Ukraine that were trying to flee the country, and they opened fire on them, to keep them from fleeing. And it seems like these fanatical groups that are, fanatically anti-communist, that have a kind of pro-Hitler narrative of the Second World War, they are taking over the bulk of the fighting, and they are a lot like the ISIL terrorists that have operated in Syria and Iraq. And this fits that whole strategy of the United States of kind of cultivating these fanatical extremist groups to fight their wars on their behalf and attack countries. And it makes me worried that I think the strategy in Ukraine may be they want to make this a prolonged conflict. They want to keep Russia in Ukraine as long as possible, keep them fighting, against an insurgency of extremist groups. They're already calling for international volunteers. And they're trying to basically do what was done to the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, draw them into a country and prolong the fighting as long as possible. And I hope that the Russian president realizes it and can figure out a way to maneuver Russia to get out of there as fast as possible, because that will ultimately hurt Russia. And I feel like they have learned a lot from the history of the Soviet Union and the war in Afghanistan, and they realize that this is the strategy. Look, I mean, if the Ukrainian officials really wanted this to end, all they would have to do is recognize that the eastern regions are going to be left alone and say they're not going to join NATO, and it would end. They're not willing to do that. And the fact that Zelensky is not negotiating in a serious way indicates to me that the strategy is to keep Russia there as long as possible. It's not to just defend Ukraine or something like that. But that's my thoughts on the situation.
Well, the other thing I think is, to some extent, you can kind of and I'm just throwing this out. Nobody said anything to me. Nobody certainly, Lavrov certainly isn't asking me. You kind of partition Western Europe, Western Ukraine off there on the Poland border there. I mean, they love the Ukrainians. You can have them, and that's where all of the center of the the home of these far right wing fascists are. You kind of partition them off there and say, you want them, they're yours. And now you've got effectively like an Idlib, a Badlands, as Alexander McCurris would refer to it, an Idlib on the Polish border, and just say to the Europeans, well, you wanted them, they're yours. What do you think?
Sure. I mean, it seems to me that there are big differences in the culture in the country. There are some people in the eastern regions who really feel that they are Russian, are really proud of the history of the Soviet Union. There are people in the western regions who really hate the Soviet Union and only speak Ukrainian, not the Russian language. And there are some key differences there. And the hope of the Minsk agreement was to bring the country back together, to integrate the Donetsk and Lugansk republics back into Ukrainian society. Russia did not want them to join Russia. Russia did not want to recognize their republics. They waited 8 years, and they said to them, and they were begging Russia, please recognize us, grant our republics recognition. And Russia said, nope, you can go back and join Ukraine. We're going to help facilitate the Minsk agreement so that Ukraine will bring you back in. Russia wanted these people to be part of Ukraine, to be accepted in Ukrainian society. They wanted to restore Ukraine back to some notion of balance that respected different peoples throughout the region. And that wasn't done. I mean, that wasn't allowed to happen. The Ukrainian authorities have made clear they will not let these people rejoin society and be respected as individuals. I mean, you read about, this is not getting any publicity in the United States, but imagine that there was some right-wing, governor in Arizona or Texas or New Mexico, and he started writing people of Chicano or Latino descent tickets and taking them to court for speaking Spanish. That would be outrageous, right? Dragging people to court for speaking their own language, giving people tickets and court appearances for speaking their own language, that would be condemned universally. That's what the Ukrainian government has been doing to Russian speakers in Ukraine. They have actually been writing people tickets and dragging them to court for speaking the language many of them grew up speaking in their own household. And when you make clear to a group of people that they're basically not welcome in your country, when you then, when they break away and declare independence, and rather than trying to de-escalate the situation, you shell and bomb them for 8 years straight and kill 14,000 of them. At that point, if they want independence and Russia's right on your border, it may be a situation where Russia says, look, we're going to recognize you. That aspect of this conflict is never acknowledged. The narrative we have in Western media is that Putin was having a bad day and he said, all right, I'm going into Ukraine. I want the Soviet Union back. And it's like there are facts here. There's been a conflict in the country for 8 years. There's like a real story here of how this developed, and no one seems interested. People have compared it. One of the best video analogies I heard, someone in a video said, this is almost like arguing with somebody in a public place who's crying, right? And you can't argue in a public place with someone who's crying because immediately everyone's going to see the situation. They're going to say, oh, you're being so mean to that person who's crying. They don't know what the argument's about. They don't know anything. They just see that person crying. And that's kind of how U.S. media is portraying this. Ukraine is just under attack. They're suffering. How dare you not have a heart? And it's like, yes, this shouldn't be happening. This war shouldn't be happening. But it's happening because of 8 years of Russia trying to de-escalate this and not being listened to.
In his State of the Union, the president said that the world stands with the United States and the world stands against Russia. And when you look at the world and the fact that India isn't in, Saudi Arabia isn't in, Israel, amazingly, isn't in, not one Muslim country has joined the condemnation. And then we've got Slovakia, I think Poland, and one other country that's refusing to send fighter jets into Ukraine. The world is either a lot smaller than Biden's globe is a lot smaller than my globe, or the narrative isn't quite as Joe Biden is portraying it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, there's talk now, from what I understand, the United States is thinking about putting sanctions on India for continuing to buy U.S. weapons. And, I mean, especially the communist world. I mean, the Bolivarian socialist countries, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba. Cuba gave a very firm speech at the UN, basically blaming this on NATO and pointing out that NATO is responsible for this. China has come forward and said that, while they call for de-escalation, the blame for this lays on the United States. They try to make it sound like the whole world is on one side, and that's a very grandiose way of speaking, but it's simply not the reality of the case. Kind of reminds you of George W. Bush's coalition of the willing, and how he made it sound like the world was supporting his invasion of Iraq when the world clearly wasn't. These grandiose statements from U.S. leaders, they continue to call this an unprovoked military intervention, as if it hasn't been provoked for 8 years straight. And one thing I've noticed in U.S. media, if they never are even acknowledging the other side of the argument, that means they don't have an argument of their own. I mean, no one is even acknowledging anything that Russia has said throughout this. If you watch American TV, I heard a CNN anchor say Ukraine was a peaceful country until now. Really? For the past 8 years, it's been peaceful? I mean, so this just shows you the hypocrisy here. And the fact they won't even acknowledge the other side of the argument shows that they're kind of standing on a house of cards.
Well, the other thing is, and I had somebody that I know recently say this to me, and I know it's only because they're watching TV. The whole world was with us. And I said, well, if you don't include South America and Central America and the Caribbean, if you don't include the Muslim world and the Middle East and the African nations, if you don't include the socialist countries, it's America. But to me, that is telling, in that when President Biden and the news say the whole world is with us, they mean we don't count anybody as being part of the whole world unless they're part of the U.S. empire. If they ain't part of the U.S. empire, if they haven't been absorbed and taken over yet, their lives are worthless and they're not part of the world. Your thoughts, Caleb?
Oh, sure. I mean, and this is the very grandiose way of speaking, that whatever the United States wants is the peace process. If you reject it, you're rejecting the peace process. This is the code words of U.S. diplomacy we've heard for many, many decades.
Switching to another part of the world, UAE's victory over Houthis at the UN is a grave loss for Yemen. The UN Security Council passed a new Yemen resolution this week that renewed and broadened the arms embargo on the Houthis and described them as a terrorist group. Now, we go back, Caleb, to the campaign, and Joe Biden talked about ending this conflict. He talked about not providing offensive weapons or only providing defensive weapons to the Saudis. And now, over the last year, this situation has gotten worse.
Indeed. And, with the way international developments are going, with the war in Ukraine, it appears that, you would hope that Russia and China would be able to block a resolution like this because the people of Yemen are fighting for their lives and they're facing a bombardment. And the UN has condemned the bombardment of Yemen by Saudi Arabia over and over and over again. But as you can see, Saudi Arabia is taking a somewhat neutral stance, and that's, very, very helpful to Russia and China at a moment like this when, there's a conflict going on. And also, as you can see, the world's attention is elsewhere. And I think, let me just tell you this. I continue to hear clips and voices of people in American media making, just blatantly racist statements about Ukraine and saying, oh, these refugees, they're not like Syria or Yemen. These are Europeans. And, this is a European city. It's civilized. And I just hear this blatant racism from U.S. officials. Like somehow U.S. voices on CNN, U.S. media voices, somehow we're supposed to have empathy for Ukrainians. We're supposed to have it more because black and brown people, they just get killed all the time. And that's just something that happens. But these Ukrainians are white people like us, so we should be upset about it. I mean, I'm horrified by that, but it gets more blatant. I mean, people are upset about what's going on in Ukraine. They don't know the specifics of it. What's been going on in Yemen with Saudi bombs and a refugee crisis and using food as a weapon of war and preventing, humanitarian medicine from getting into the country and blocking humanitarian aid. All of that's been going on since 2015, and there hasn't been global outrage. There hasn't been global outrage about what Saudi Arabia is doing. Saudi Arabia is a U.S. ally, and the people being killed are deemed, apparently, in U.S. media to be less human than the Ukrainians are, and it's really, really shocking to see how this selective outrage is playing out and how we're seeing some blatant, revealing, use of language by Western commentators.
And they're being defined as a terrorist group for simply defending themselves.
Indeed. I mean, this is a group of people that are defending themselves. I mean, this is, the Houthis, they are, Houthi is kind of a derogatory term. I mean, the term is Ansar Allah is what the name of their organization is. And they were formed, and they were a group of Shia Muslims, a religious minority in Yemen. And in 2006, the U.S.-backed Yemeni government started attacking them, and so they formed an armed militia to protect themselves. And then after that, there was the Arab Spring, and they were a big part of the Arab Spring and the protests that brought down Saleh, who was the U.S.-backed president. And then after the Arab Spring, they had a fake election with only one candidate on the ballot, Mansour Hadi. And Mansour Hadi, was a puppet of Saudi Arabia, and they rejected that president. And now they sit at the center of a coalition of different forces in Yemeni society that reject the Saudi-imposed government. And, to call them a terrorist organization is not correct because, I mean, it's pretty clear how long this war has lasted. It's pretty clear that they represent a pretty solid majority of the Yemeni people. If they didn't have a huge base of support among the population, they're up against the fourth largest military budget in the world. All of the U.S.-aligned Arab regimes are just, piling in on them, and they continue to hold out and resist. And Yemen is one of the poorest countries on earth, I mean, in terms of life expectancy and living conditions, and yet they're holding out year after year after year. If they didn't have a huge base of very loyal people in the population, this wouldn't be happening. So the narrative that they're just a terrorist group or they're proxies of Iran, it just doesn't match the facts.
Caleb Maupin, as always, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate that analysis, and we look forward to having you back.
Sure thing. Always a pleasure.
Folks, you're listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon. I'm joined here by my co-host, Garland Nixon. There's more on the other side. Stay tuned.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
So, Sean, What do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
We are back, and you're listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon, joined here by my co-host, Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
The Wall Street Journal reports that February hiring strongest since the summer. Unemployment falls to pandemic low. But rising oil prices and looming rate increases from the Fed pose new threats to the jobs recovery. This while CNBC reports jobless claims total 215,000 fewer than expected. Productivity rises 6.6% in the wake of President Biden's State of the Union. What are we to make of all of this? Well, for insight, let's turn to our next guest. He's an associate professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and former president of the National Economic Association, Dr. Linwood Tauheed. As always, sir, welcome back.
Thank you.
So we've got initial claims totaling 215,000, below the 225,000 that was estimated, the lowest since January 1st. And you got a separate report showing Q4 productivity up 6.6%. One would think that, oh my goodness, there's light at the end of the tunnel. But could this be an oncoming train?
Output is at 9.1%, hours at 2.4% in terms of an increase, which leads to that productivity increase of 6.6, 6.7%. That means workers are being worked harder. They're working. They're not being paid necessarily for the increase in output, but they're being pressured to work harder, and they're being more productive. But the increase in productivity has. The increase in wages hasn't kept up with the increase in productivity since 1973. So workers since 1973 have been working harder and being paid less. So this is a continuation of that cycle. As far as these jobless claims, Wait a minute. Let me
ask you to expand on one point right there, and that is, wages have not kept up with productivity. So wages or workers are producing more, making less. But even now, they're talking about businesses having to pay more to get people to actually come to work. So even with that, there is still an imbalance.
Yes, the economic theory would argue that if you can't get people to come to work because of the Great Resignation or whatever is causing this, that if you offer higher wages, then people will come to work. But business people are reluctant to do that. They don't operate in the way that economic theory says they're operating. What they will tend to do is simply work the workers they have harder, but expect them to increase their productivity, which we're seeing this worked out now.
Those things, we've been looking at an economy that, seemed to have been stagnant lately. There's a few, indicators that maybe, things could at least be stable. But we have to talk about what's happening with these sanctions. With the, I read something, and this is from, I think it was the Times. But anyway, this is what it said. In fact, just yesterday, Jerome Powell admitted that he had not been consulted, suggesting that arguably the most momentous financial decision in modern history has been made without consulting the single most important financial person in the U.S. Okay, these sanctions that are going on, we have to talk about that. It appears that economic advisors said to the Biden administration and to the EU leaders, hey, pull back the reins a little bit, make sure you don't go too far with these sanctions because they could blow back and tear us all up. They seem to have lost control, whatever the case may be, and they are sanctioning a country that's the #1 producer of wheat in the world and all of these precious metals and on and on and on. What do you think we're looking at with the market's kind of going nuts? What is your what are your thoughts on all of this?
The U.S. gets 10% of its oil from Russia. But the European countries are getting 30% and more of their oil from Russia. Interestingly enough, the oil from Russia flows through oil pipes in Ukraine. And so that itself is a destabilizing process. And so Europe is going to be hit very, very hard by this. And how well that coalition in NATO continues on to take the strikes from U.S. leading these sanctions, we'll see how long that's going to go. But internally, the Fed had planned to increase interest rates, one starting in March, and then maybe three times this year as well, even before the sanctions. And it is fairly remarkable that the U.S. would put sanctions on Russia, a huge trading partner, knowing that that's going to increase the price of energy and add to inflation, and knowing that it will cause a slowdown in other activities that use energy, and not ask the chairman of the Federal Reserve his opinion on that. This is not, certainly not the time to slow down the economy by an increase in interest rates. But the plan has not been changed to do that. And so I think you're right. This economy has been bumping along. It's been stagnating for quite a while. And I think this is going to be a move towards recession, which is not the time to increase interest rates.
I thought Powell and the folks at the Fed knew what they were doing. I thought they were supposed to be pretty smart people. So in very simplistic terms, as I understand it, you've got basically two causes of inflation, either demand side or supply side. And if you have demand side inflation, then raising interest rates, making money more expensive, is a workable tool, because the more money costs, the less people will be inclined to spend it. But this is really a supply side problem. So they're using a demand side solution to a supply side problem. I mean, that's Econ 101, or maybe second semester of Econ 101. So help me understand, how can they be so reckless?
Yes, it seems to me that every president can operate on the domestic stage or on the foreign stage. And with Biden's domestic approval rating down at 37% or 39%, he's looking to get some boost in that on the international stage, which has no interference by anyone else. He's the commander in chief. And by making these kinds of decisions to respond to Russia with sanctions, I think he's hoping he'll get some boost in his approval ratings. I think the opposite is in fact going to happen, because we're going to see some economic pushback in terms of energy prices, oil prices, inflation, and now with Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve, going to increase interest rates this month. I see we will see a downturn in the economy. So I think this is in this case, this is desperation on the part of the president to boost his numbers. Americans are going to be hurt. Europeans are going to be hurt even more. But I guess Europeans don't vote in presidential or congressional elections, so that's not a big a deal.
Well, just really quickly, I think you're absolutely right. And one of the miscalculations I think the administration could be making is I don't know that Biden personally will get the boost that he's looking for because, as you just said, this is not the presidential election. This is going to be the congressional election. So he won't even be on the ballot. So I don't know that Americans are going to make those connections in their minds, especially when they're paying more at the pump.
Yeah, I was about to say, the other thing is this. Certainly Americans are like, yeah, boy, we don't like our gas prices and food prices to be up, and that's going to hurt. But let me ask you this. There are technical things in the market. When we find out that Russia and Ukraine, they provide I think it's neon gas that's used to make chips. So the chips go, zinc, all of these precious metals that come out of Russia, all things that you don't think about that
aluminum.
That are necessary. And I'm seeing these metals go through the roof. Also the thing with the SWIFT, what are the secondary issues that I hear from economists are extremely dangerous based on these sanctions that we wouldn't ordinarily think of, that you would look at and say, well, right there, you may not realize that, but that could be a big problem?
Well, Russia and Ukraine are the two largest landmass countries in Europe, in Asia, in fact. And so they have a tremendous amount of land, which covers a tremendous amount of natural resources. Yeah, we hear about oil and wheat, but there are all kinds of precious metals that are used in electronic devices and other kinds of things that with the sanctions, no one in the West can buy. Or an interesting phenomenon with oil is not in the sanctions list. So persons in the West can buy Russian oil. They can pay for Russian oil with dollars, but Russia is now locked out of the SWIFT system, so they can't use those dollars. They can't spend it. And to put Russia into a situation where they can sell oil, but they can't spend the revenue from oil, really leaves them almost in a situation where they say, well, we won't sell our oil until we can use the money we're paid for. So that's a danger also. There's also the danger, of course, China is on the other side, and China is a huge and growing economy, which has good relations with Russia, but those relations are relationships between countries, and China can actually use this to its advantage by pulling Russia into its own payment system in the yuan, and bringing Russia and other countries that want to trade with Russia into the Chinese payment system. So the big winner out of this may be China.
And to that point, isn't this moving the world off of the dollar? As the United States is just almost seemingly randomly sanctioning countries, and Iran and China and Venezuela and other countries are finding ways around the SWIFT system in order to engage in trade and commerce, that in the long run, the United States could be doing itself a very, very great disservice by countries moving off of the dollar as the reserve currency.
Correct. I mean, imagine Germany, which buys most of its oil, a considerable amount of its oil, maybe not most of its oil, from Russia, and that's continuing on, but they have to go through the SWIFT system and make those payments in dollars. Instead, the Germans will be able to go through the Chinese SIPS system and make those payments in yuan. That means that the dollar is slowly stops being the world currency.
And what does that do to the U.S. economy?
Well, what it means is that it's going to be more expensive for dollar-denominated transactions to occur. Things from overseas, imports will become more expensive. We're already in a trade deficit. We import more than we export. And when imports become more expensive because the dollar value drops, because the yuan value increases, that slows down the economy here even more.
Now, let me ask you this, and I've heard this said, but I don't know anything about it. Okay, what happens if if oil's trading at, these unbelievable numbers, $112 a barrel, and Russia says, we'll sell ours at 80? You know, there are a lot of people out there that want oil, and if they can get a bargain like that, I mean, you know, if they can get 10, 15, 20% off, that changes things dramatically. Are there cards like that that Russia could potentially play that would disrupt the market, and that if they need the money, they got to eat? What are your thoughts?
I think there are cards that Russia could play, but Russia has actually a very good relationship with Saudi Arabia. It is Saudi Arabia and Russia that have kept the oil prices up. And if Saudi Arabia wanted to enter that game with Russia, that would be fine. But I don't see Russia doing that to an ally in this instance. It's interesting. Saudi Arabia is an ally with Russia on this, and an ally with the U.S. on Yemen, and so forth and so on. Saudi Arabia is whatever it needs to be to whoever it talks to. But I don't think the Russians could play that card, and perhaps they might do that with countries that buy oil from Russia and not from Saudi Arabia. In doing so, if they were to do that, then if those payments were to come through the Chinese SIP system, then that means that the yuan increasingly becomes a trading currency.
It doesn't seem as though there's a lot of cushion here in the United States economy for people to absorb a lot of pain. And so I don't know, again, I don't know how the Fed can really figure that raising rates is going to make a lot of sense, or or Biden's thinking that people in the name of America are willing to take a lot of pain. I don't know that people have the latitude to do that. We got 30 seconds.
Well, it's in the name of Ukraine, and apparently, you know, Biden and others are willing to fight the Russians to the last Ukrainian. There's no commitment of troops into Russia from the U.S., and that will probably stay. So all of this is economic sanctions, and to raise interest rates right now, which interest rates may have to be raised a bit more than they anticipated, because of the increase in oil prices that's going to come from the sanctions. But raising interest rates at that rate will create recessionary pressures. Persons will be out of work, and generally it is lower income workers who suffer the most when that occurs. The base of the Democratic Party, if you will.
Dr. Linwood Tauheed, as always, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate it. We look forward to having you back.
Thank you.
Folks, you are listening to the Critical Hour here on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon, joined here by my co-host, Garland Nixon. There's more on the other side. Stay tuned.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
We are back, and you're listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon, joined here by my co-host, Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
There is an interesting piece in Pearls and Irritations entitled, Strategists Admit West is Goading China into War. U.S. military experts say a war over Taiwan is desirable because Asia's growth to become world's economic heartland has become unstoppable. One might think, as evidence of such, in unofficial capacity, as reported, Mike Pompeo urges U.S. to recognize Taiwan. Former U.S. Secretary of State Pompeo, in a speech earlier today on a non-official visit to Taiwan, called for the U.S. to give diplomatic recognition to the self-ruled island China claims as its own territory. For insight into this, we turn to our next guest. He's an activist, writer, teacher, and analyst, KJ No. As always, KJ, welcome back.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
So am I wrong to tie these two pieces together? And I also wonder, or maybe the question should be, when is your unofficial capacity as former U.S. Secretary of State, former capacity? KJ No.
Yes. Well, I mean, there's a continuity between policies, between the Biden, the Trump, the Obama, the Bush,